Today's show is sponsored by Onyx, the award-winning cloud solutions provider. As a premier Google Cloud partner and an advanced consulting partner for AWS, Onyx is the partner you need to take advantage of all the cloud has to offer. Always on, Onyx provides consulting services for cloud infrastructure, collaboration, devices, enterprise search, and geospatial technology. They build long-standing, authentic relationships with their clients. Onyx's cloud data experts are your trusted advisors for discovery and planning to data migration, storage, and visualization. Their team provides experienced machine learning consulting and ensures you are maximizing your data's value. See why 97% of their clients say they're satisfied with the work Onyx has done for them. For a limited time, Onyx is offering your organization a free 6-hour cloud data strategy workshop, normally valued at over $2,000. For more information on this special offer, visit onyxnet.com/thecloudcast. That's ONIXNET.com, onyxnet.com/thecloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in North Carolina. Aaron, you and I are back. Do you remember what we were doing on Groundhog's Day 10 years ago?
That feels like a loaded question to me. There's no way I do remember, but I do know we're coming up on 10 years of the Cloudcast.
Yeah, we are. This is actually our very first show. Came out Groundhog's Day 2011. This show is going to be coming out on the day after Groundhog's Day. So hopefully nobody's doing the same thing as yesterday. But yeah, 10 years of this stuff. Can you believe for people that jump around jobs as much as we did, or we still do to a certain extent, can you believe we've done anything consistently for 10 years?
Yeah, no, that's the single biggest surprise. Oh, yeah, and we're closing in on 500 shows later this year as well, and so not just 10 years, but 500 shows. The fact that we've been able to that find guests that are willing to speak with us. So first of all, big huge thanks to the guests that are out there. I mean, they've completely made the show over the years, and thank you to all the listeners. I think we're at somewhere around 8 million downloads in 10 years. And I mean, in the first year, I probably, looking at first year stats, wouldn't have predicted we ever would have gotten 1 million.
No, I think it was like our moms and friends and family. So yeah, big, huge thank you to everybody around the world, right? It's amazing to us. Every week we see the stats and different places around the world that are listening, and places where maybe English is a second language or just anything like that. So yeah, huge thank you to everybody who listens, all the guests, all the sponsors, everybody who's even the backup co-hosts who have been on the show from time to time. Big thank you to them as well. So
yeah, and thanks to everyone for always wanting to continue their learning journey with us.
The other thing, we'll put some things in Cloud News of the Week, some announcements and stuff for this week, but we have kind of a big announcement. For anybody who's, been listening since, December, we kicked off this idea of Cloudcast Basics. We did season 0 of Cloudcast Basics back at the end of December. We got some news for this month. Aaron, what's going on with Cloudcast Basics?
Yeah, absolutely. So season 1. So, we're officially into the seasons, if you will. And so Cloudcast Basics, we are doing this one a little different. So in case you haven't followed, this one is more Netflix-like. We're dropping it in seasons, and we're dropping all the shows at once. So we have 10 shows, which covers the basics of cloud computing. We wanted to really set a foundation in season 1. And so this one may not necessarily be designed for the core Cloudcast listener. This is designed for folks new to the industry. It's designed for your friends and your family when they're like, what the heck do you do? And I'd like to learn more about cloud computing. Send Cloudcast Basics their way.
Yeah. So just a quick preview for anybody. We did compute, storage, networking, so all the IaaS layers, security, databases and data lakes, platform as a service, software as a service. We touched on hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, and then we sort of finished off the year with AI, ML, analytics. So kind of we hit the whole spectrum. Obviously, in 15 or 20 minutes, we can't go super deep. But again, this is to get people started. So as much as you've been an awesome community and learning for yourself, if you could help us just a little bit, spread the word. Tell your friends about the show, ask them to subscribe, ask them to give us feedback on Apple Podcasts and other things. We would love to do that. Obviously, we're going to keep doing the Cloudcast, as Aaron mentioned. Episode 500 is coming up here in a month or so, and excited to keep going. So, Aaron, we don't sort of self-congratulate very much, but congratulations on 10 years, man. It's been a fun run.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to, I don't know. I feel like if I say another 10, I'm jinxing myself. And by the way, I didn't know if we were going to do 10 to begin with. So just looking forward to continuing the show.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, again, thanks to everybody. Thanks to guests. Thanks to sponsors. And with that, we will wrap up both Cloud News of the Week, and we will get to our interview right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast. Today's show is sponsored by BMC, and BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? The A game is when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/agame. That's bmc.com/agame. And we're back. And folks, as you know, one of the topics that is always a big area of interest for our audience is AI, ML, data science. Aaron, we've talked about this with all sorts of angles, whether it's, digging into stuff like TensorFlow or AI ops or ML ops. But then one of the things that comes back all the time is just, okay, those are cool. They're cool technologies and all, but how do we really make our analytics team, our data science team really successful? Like, what are the building blocks? What are the core things that we need to be successful? How do we work things from idea to production, all those sort of things? And so we thought, okay, let's dig back into that. Let's really get into, how do we automate these things? How do we make the team successful? And so we're really excited today to have Derek Knudsen, who is CTO of Alteryx, joining us today. Derek, welcome. Great to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, Alteryx is right in this space that I talked about, helping to make analytics teams successful. Before we dive into that, give us a little bit of your background. What makes you passionate about helping analytics teams improve their business?
Well, my experience is my path to analytics is a bit circuitous. When my career started, I was very technical, very technology focused. And throughout my career, I kind of advanced up the value chain almost to first moving into architecture and then trying to figure out technical strategy. And then I got really fascinated with, how businesses think about their strategy and how that connects with technology. And that really steered me into a space of just using technology to solve, business problems to help organizations with business transformation. Logical intersection there was with data. And so probably, 6 or 7 years ago, I started spending a lot of time in the data space. And when I was doing a lot of management strategic consulting for organizations, I always seemed to find customers who were struggling to get value out of data. And that's really where my passion began to develop for the analytics space. And that steered me to Alteryx.
Very cool.
And let me jump in there as well, Derek. Help us a little bit with kind of some clarification quickly. We'll hear like, oh, there's an analytics team, or there's a data science team, or there's an AI and ML team. And sometimes they might be referred to as different teams, sometimes the same teams. And so help us with drawing the lines a little bit, right? Are they only different in name, or are they different in functional and skill differences, or places where they group, I guess is the best way to put that, Derek.
Historically, I think those groups have been pretty segregated, to be honest with you. I mean, analytics team started with, people who usually grew up in Excel, right? They would consume kind of small data via Excel, and they would try and generate an insight off of that. Then along came the Tableaus and Clicks of the world, and the ability to do visualization started blurring the line where people could use more descriptive analytics versus just pure kind of historical reporting. Those groups still really do exist today. If you look at where companies spend money on analytics, what gets all the press is the cool stuff, right? The data science and the AI and ML. But the vast majority of opportunity for companies is really in that traditional analytics space, descriptive analytics space. So that's, today it's almost a $50 billion space, which is just crazy to think about that area. But that is really where the information worker spends time trying to drive an insider decision using data. So I think that organization still does very much exist today. You are getting data science organizations that are popping up much more inside of these companies. So we are doing more things with machine learning and predictive analytics. That stuff is becoming much more accessible for the average consumer of information. We talk a lot at Alteryx about this concept of a citizen data scientist. And if you think about it, that's somebody who maybe grew up in pivot tables in Excel, and maybe they started writing Excel macros, and they started to create more of a development skill set, and they started getting into advanced analytics, things like predictive analytics. And with the ability for people to learn online, Udemy or any one of your various learning institutes, and then the tooling being so accessible now, while there still is very formal data science teams who kind of handle that last mile data science, the really robust, difficult, hard to solve, corporate type strategy data science problems, we're seeing a ton of graying of the lines or blurring of the lines between analytic teams and data science teams. So the convergence of these personas is becoming a real deal, or data engineering, data analytics, machine learning type analytics. Those are all happening not just through one persona, but in one tool set. I think that's the ultimate panacea for companies like Alteryx, is to be that one-stop shop where whether you're new to analytics and you're just learning it, you're just trying to prep and blend data to create some insight, or you're farther in the journey and you're doing really advanced machine learning type stuff like deep neural networking. We want to be that one-stop shop that can evolve with you during your journey, but also as your company matures in the analytics space.
Yeah, no, it's and that's helpful. It kind of puts it into context of, you don't have to think about these as just needle in a haystack kind of problems. I want to talk a little bit about, or I have some questions sort of about workflows with analytics, right? What do common workflows look like in the analytics world in terms of, is it just sort of constant flows of data into the system and then figuring out what to do with them, or what are the types of things that you think about in terms of not just, getting good answers out of the analytics, but creating good process so that, they have environments to be successful once they're digging into the data and presenting it out to different teams. What do those workflows look like?
Well, I think organizations get super excited. There's all sorts of, really hip terms in the world now. There's lots of streaming analytics out there. So you get companies and people really excited about that. At times they'll blur that with what you call real-time analytics in terms of everything streaming, and that's real-time when they're really not one and the same. So a lot of the times it depends on what you mean by real-time analytics. Most of the time, again, people associate with streaming analytics. So that's technologies like, AWS Kinesis or serverless. And there's obviously is business cases for using that. Autonomous driving is the obvious streaming analytics use case. But that is a very small percentage of how organizations use data. If you think about analytics, it's really about using information to make decisions. A great analytics is about presenting the right information at the right time in the right way to make those decisions. And I think that's where you see a ton of industry focus, not just on the consumption side in terms of what customers are trying to do with the platforms and what data, but on the provider side, where we're trying to solve each one of those dimensions in terms of right information, the timeliness of that information, and then how do you present the information in a way that that person or sets of people can make a decision. for Alteryx and other great platforms, we really focus on that reduction of time to insight is what we call it. But the key for this stuff is really to the point you made around using it the right way. The best analytics users that we've seen are really good at not designing the best solution, but really focusing on designing the right solution. And by right, it means having a good depth of understanding on what decision needs to be made, when and how often that decision needs to be made, what data is required to make the decision, and then what people typically ignore is how you consume the information. Not every information is creating some quantifiable answer, like you get off of predicting a price for a house. Like that's a very discernible problem to solve. A lot of the times it's about making inferences off how data is visualized and making decisions off of that. So when organizations get really, really good at analytics, they get very, very thoughtful in terms of how they design for those analytics, and they just don't design everything to be perfect. They try and balance that value versus investment piece to provide just that really critical, inflection point between investment and value. And that's the organizations we see that are great with it. That's what they do.
And so that's a really good point. It has me kind of thinking in a couple different directions here, but I'm kind of wanted to explore the productivity aspect of this a little bit more. We talked to a lot of both DevOps and developer and the concept of productivity on this show a good bit. In the context of these applications constantly changing and these data sets constantly changing, how does that apply to the analytics groups, right? Does this become a offline versus real-time problem at times, or does it expose or create bottlenecks today? And if so, how do they get around those bottlenecks at times as well?
It's a challenge. You guys mentioned at the top of the show, just the concept of ML ops and that stuff. That's definitely become much more in vogue over the last few years. You probably have talked about this statistic before, but it's commonly believed that 90% of machine learning models never make it into production. I would argue that not every model goes into production. A lot of times you're creating some analytical view or model to inform a decision, and it doesn't need to be productionalized, right? You're not making that decision over and over and over again. You're just doing some activity to drive insight that allows you to make an informed decision. But the concept of let's err on the side of, hey, I've created a model and I want to take it to production. That's a huge challenge for the data scientists, let alone kind of the citizen data scientists. So let's just walk through the very common data scientist example. Company has, they do churn analysis and they're churning customers. Data scientists create some amazing churn model. Maybe they want to inject it into like Salesforce Service Cloud or ServiceNow. So as their reps are on the phone, dealing with an unsatisfied customer, they're making really smart churn decisions in terms of where they make investments with resources based on, lifetime value, et cetera, et cetera. The question's always been, how do I get it into production? DevOps and things like that. Typically, the entity that's providing the application or service or what have you is already technically savvy, and they kind of know a little bit about how you take something from development into production. Well, it gets really difficult when you take a data scientist who really has no affiliation towards IT, and you're trying to get them to figure out, okay, I've got this model, how do I create a service endpoint that somebody can consume? How do I publish that in some service catalog? How do I get my Salesforce team to inject it into Service Cloud so my sales reps or customer reps can leverage it? It's a pretty tall barrier for a data scientist, let alone a citizen data scientist who's so far removed from the realities of IT. So that becomes a significant problem. It still is, ML ops is what the solution has been. It's been, hey, let's use ML ops to take the great concepts of DevOps and bring it into the analytics world. That space is still kind of in that storming and forming mode. It was a very popular thing to talk about 12, 18 months ago when the hype cycle was pretty high on it. And I think it's gotten better, especially around things like I publish my model to production, and now I'm getting model drift. And model drift being you train machine learning models based on data, when it starts making decisions on that production data, it starts affecting the effectivity of the training data, meaning the decision that it makes starts to drift because the data isn't consistent with the training data anymore. And so I think where organizations have gotten much better with ML ops is saying, hey, I'm going to define these thresholds of drift. And when something gets outside the threshold, then I bring the model back in, I retrain it, and I redeploy it to production. I think that part's gotten actually pretty good. Where it's still having some gaps, which is much more of a, what's the right way to say it, more like a humanity gap, is on things like ensuring that there's not decision bias in your model. That's making non-objective decision making based on, maybe poor criteria. It could be gender, it could be age. That happens a ton in like underwriting and things like that. There's compliance demands now, right? I have to be able to reproduce a specific decision outcome that's being mandated by, governments and regulatory agencies. So now MLOps is not just, hey, I want to create this really seamless CI/CD process for ops or for ML. And not only do I want to monitor drift off those models, but now I got to think about, how do I think about compliance requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So complicated space. It's evolving though. Everybody's got offerings in this space, whether you're Microsoft or Amazon. Everybody's trying to solve this ML ops space. But the great thing about it is, the development world has had to handle a ton of these obstacles. And so there's a huge advantage to the ML ops space in that they can look at development and building software and leverage some of those learnings. And hopefully that means it accelerates their time frame in terms of maturity.
Yeah, so I'm curious, listening to some of the areas where you talk about bottlenecks, I'm curious if you're talking to, you walk in and you're talking to the analytics team, data science team, whatever they're called, are they typically kind of going, I wish we could do the thing that like web developers do with like A/B testing. I wish I could run more tests against production environments, those types of things. Or as you talked about, they're not usually, they're oftentimes it's like sort of separate from the IT organizations. Are they just spending way too much time having to learn how to operate all this stuff because it's like, well, our stuff is so different than the guys that run email or ERP systems? Like, I guess the question is sort of, do they shift to sort of wanting to be more like web application developers and wish they were spending their time on that? Or are they just really kind of bottlenecked a lot with this operation stuff because they're kind of a separate group oftentimes than what traditional IT supports? Do you get any sense of either of those?
That's a good question. I think the traditional data scientist is still, they're historically statisticians. They're PhDs in statistics or linear algebra, and they enjoy the statistical space. So I have seen a lower interest in delving into more of the traditional development spaces. Where those barriers are getting broken down now is as you're democratizing analytics and you're getting people to engage in the analytic process, we're seeing a lot more developers now engaging in machine learning and predictive analytics because it's more accessible. And a lot of platforms are making it more accessible. And what that means is you're bringing those personas to the space who have an appreciation for the need to do that stuff. And maybe that data scientist group is getting regulated to, yes, they're creating their models and having to go through very similar pains, but they're doing it on a very discrete basis. But where they're really kind of empowering the organization around these model deployments and A/B testing is they're kind of part of the CI/CD process where they review models, but they're kind of getting out of the way in terms of the operationalization of those models. And other entities within the organization are contributing the models, and they're acting as a review entity to that, which is driving a lot more velocity in terms of publishing analytics out for consumption. So it's a hit and miss. I think a lot of times data scientists, they're data scientists. They don't often want to spend time on the operational component. They're much more into the academia of the models they create. And to be an effective data scientist, though, I'm sure you would argue is, the only way you're effective is that people use your models. Models and consuming models in a vacuum is not really productionalizing those models, and the organization's not getting the value out of those models. So there's going to be a learning curve for those groups getting on board with it. And it's just hit and miss in terms of how much organizations press that for those personas.
And Derek, follow up to that then. To kind of prevent that, I'll just use the term navel gazing, right? Can you give us some examples of typical scenarios or results that companies often achieve when they do achieve better alignment and they do roll out these models effectively and get that alignment between the analytic teams and kind of operations as well? What are kind of some of the, I guess, what's the low hanging fruit and the typical use cases that benefit the most?
Well, the one that the use case that I think you'll see a ton of momentum on, and we talk about, analytics process automation, is the exciting kind of sexy area of analytics is machine learning and all that stuff, and predictive analytics, prescriptive analytics even. I think where you see a ton of value being created on the analytics side is really on that APA idea, and that's taking data from a discernible amount of input points and then using process automation, analytics process automation to drive outcomes and then publishing those outcomes out. Doesn't always need to be a model. A lot of times it's basic data-oriented process automation. There's tons of good examples that we have. I'm sure other companies have them. One example is, in terms of just taking really hard processes and making them very simple, is a Western Union customer of ours. They obviously have to spend a lot of time in detecting fraud. Lots of wired transactions happen with them every single day. I think they do something on the order of 30 to 40 wired transactions. I think it's every second of every day. So the amount of data they produce out of that is incredible. 60, 70 gigabytes of data a month that they've got to look at and look for fraud within that 60 to 70 gigabytes a month. Well, when taking a tool like what Alteryx provides, that process took Western Union, an individual Western Union, 100 plus hours a month they spent trying to take 63 gigabytes of data and discern fraud in that 63 gigabytes. Utilizing tools like ours to do things like analytics process automation, it went from 100 hours to 4 minutes, right? So it just monumental ROI, not just in terms of you've saved this individual, 99.9% of his time. Now he can go focus on higher value activities. But also the time to insight is dramatically reduced. So now you're really compressing the time to insight in terms of detecting that fraud and being able to take action with it. We see the same thing in healthcare fraud. Company called Scan Health that we work with. They went from spending a ton of time trying to identify fraudulent prescriptions to now spending 2 hours on a specific transaction. And that saved them millions of dollars. So I think that's the non-sexy use case, is just taking data, doing really autonomous things with that information and creating really powerful outcomes. And there's a ton of those use cases, whether you're a retailer trying to maximize or minimize, I probably should say, routing and delivery, or you're a grocer trying to do pricing optimization. Like, that's the real sweet spot of analytics. It's not just with the ML side of things and trying to do predictive analytics. Yes, those use cases exist, and yes, there's tons of value to be extracted from them, but there's also a boatload of value to be extracted from the organization. When you give them tools like Alteryx and you say, hey, go do your job with Alteryx, and you see that time compression happen and that reduction of time to insight get reduced, then the company gets a ton of lift, because it's not just a very specialized group within the organization doing that work. It's the entire company is now participating in the analytics journey. That just creates a massive value for the entire organization.
Yeah, those are awesome examples. I want to ask you one last question. I want to be conscious of your time. The Alteryx analytics platform, obviously, as you mentioned, you bring together, kind of all of the tools into one place for people to input data, work it through the pipelines, work the applications. Do you find in experience that kind of having the right tools is the better starting point for people? Like, if you have the right tools, you'll sort of organize around the tools, especially in your case, you kind of bring everything together? Or do you have to sort of get people organized in the right way? And then once you've got that kind of in place, the tools tend to accelerate that. Is there, it's sort of, the chicken or the egg sort of question, but do you find one pattern works better or makes companies more successful?
It's a great question. Before I came to Alteryx, I worked with a big bank in the Midwest to help them come up with their analytics strategy. They're a very successful bank, very profitable, but on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of their analytics maturity, they're probably near a 1 or 2. So when we had another talk to them, they'd hired some folks who had expertise in the analytics space, especially in the predictive analytics side. But the organization's ability to consume that information, to be one, organized in such a way to produce it in a consistent way, but then two, to consume it and take action on it, it just wasn't there. And so you can bring all the great tools to the organization. You can bring all the great snowflakes for data warehousing and kind of that data lake concept. You can bring all these bespoke data analytics tools to the conversation, but if you don't have some of the fundamentals in place, it's really difficult for those to be successful. One of the key areas that you have to get right up front is a lot of times people, especially if you're not analytically mature, is you get stuck on trusting the data. And I have seen this time and time again where a said organization makes an investment in analytics, they produce some analytical outcome. It could be a report, it could be a dashboard, it could be anything else. And the data doesn't look right. Or the data is not trusted, or there's no single source of truth. And what happens then is once you don't trust the data, then you're dead on arrival for whatever the tool is. So where we typically focus organizations on is ensuring that there's good data governance. So the quality of data you get in is trusted. And then it's a tooling conversation from then. And then I think the organizational dynamic doesn't matter as much. But if you don't get the data prepared correctly, cleansed correctly, governed the right way, then any tool you bring to bear is not going to be trusted. And I think organizations that focus on taking care of the data cleanliness side of things and the governance side of things are the ones that are going to get quicker time to value in terms of bringing those tools in-house and organizing around those tools. And I've seen it work both ways. I've seen organizations who do have the data environment stuff taken care of. They'll either form centers of excellence or communities of practice around specific tooling, and they'll roll it out to the organization. They'll do some hub and spoke model where they'll create kind of this core analytics group, and they'll deploy some of those ancillary folks into organizations. Because a lot of times the great thing about analytics is it combines kind of technology and data with domain knowledge. And so if you're a data scientist, as an example, and you don't have domain knowledge, you're not going to be very effective for the domain you're representing. And so oftentimes we see organizations create a core competency, and then they'll bring people in from the business and they'll skill them up around that analytics tool set, and then they'll deploy them back in to those business groups, because then they're in the best position to take the great learnings around analytics and apply them to solving real germane business problems with those business units. So that's a very common model as well. So you can bring tools in and then create a community of practice around it, or you can create kind of an organizational construct around that and then bring the right tooling for that group. You might be very new in that journey, and it might need to be visualization tools and not really predictive analytics tools. And you can make an informed decision around what's the right tool depending on what kind of group you develop. But it's a crawl, walk, run thing. Like, you got to start with basic reporting and descriptive analytics, and then you can work your way up the continuum. There's definitely value all over the continuum. It doesn't matter where you're at. It's not just a journey up to the right. It's up to the right and then down to the left. And it really depends on the use case you're trying to solve. So a lot of ways of solving the analytic organization problem. But the one thing you got to get right up front is the data.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Derek Knudsen, thank you so much for the time today, Aaron. I know, we've been talking about a lot of this sort of behind the scenes. It was great to see, a lot of the things we've been looking at kind of validated by Derek's experience. Aaron, you want to, any last thoughts or that? You want to wrap it up and take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you everyone for listening. And when this one is published, this will actually be the 10-year show, as we mentioned in the introduction as well. So again, thanks to everyone for listening. If you have a moment too, go out and give us a rating in any of the stores that are out there. Usually we just say the Apple iTunes store, but there's more of them at this point. So give us a rating if you have a moment. If you have any topics on future shows, give us an email as well, show@thecloudcast.net. We're always wanting to hear from everyone about episodes as we're planning out the next year. And so with that, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.